Sarah Martinez had seen enough death in her 12 years as a trauma nurse to know when something was unit, right? But nothing could have prepared her for the man who arrived at Mercy General that Tuesday night, bleeding from wounds that defied every medical explanation she knew. His eyes held secrets that would shatter everything she believed about her profession. The emergency department buzzed with its usual chaos when the ambulance screeched into the bay at 11:47 p.m. Sarah grabbed her stethoscope and rushed toward the incoming stretcher, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The paramedic, Jake, looked pale as he rattled off vitals that made no sense. Male? Approximately 40. Multiple lacerations across the torso. But here's the weird part. The wounds are perfectly symmetrical, like they were made with surgical precision. Sarah's heart skipped as she examined the patient. The man's face was unnaturally calm for someone who should be screaming in agony. His dark hair was matted with blood, but his breathing remained steady, controlled. Most disturbing were his eyes. They tracked her movements with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through her soul. "What's your name?" she asked, checking his pulse. The rhythm was strong. Too strong for someone who had lost this much blood. "Marcus?" he whispered, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. "Marcus Webb?" But when Sarah looked at his hospital bracelet from the ambulance, it read John Doe. She glanced at Jake questioningly, but the paramedic shrugged. "He was unconscious when we found him. Must have given us his name in the ambulance." Dr. Richards burst through the curtain, his white coat billowing behind him. "What do we have?" Sarah briefed him quickly. But as she spoke, she noticed Marcus watching the doctor with an expression that made her stomach turn. It wasn't fear or pain. It was recognition, mixed with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. The wounds required immediate surgery. But as they prepped Marcus for the operating room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying every person who entered his room. His eyes cataloged faces, names, and procedures with methodical precision. When she inserted his the fourth, he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled slightly and said, "You have gentle hands, Sarah. Your patients are lucky to have you." She hadn't told him her name. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Sarah found herself unable to leave the hospital, pacing the break room and checking the OR status board every few minutes. When Dr. Richards finally emerged, his face was grim. The lacerations were precise, almost ritualistic. But here's what I can't explain. Some of these wounds are healing at an impossible rate. And there's something else. He paused, running his hand through his graying hair. We found a small electronic device embedded in his chest near his heart. It's not medical equipment I've ever seen.
As dawn broke over the city, Sarah volunteered to monitor Marcus during his recovery. Something about this case had hooked into her mind like a fishhook, and she needed answers. When she entered his room, she found him sitting upright, fully alert, despite the heavy sedation he should still be under. "Good morning, Sarah," he said softly. "I've been waiting for you." "How do you know my name?" she demanded, her voice sharper than intended. Marcus tilted his head, studying her face with those unsettling dark eyes. "I know many things about you, Sarah Martinez. I know you live alone in apartment 4B on Maple Street. I know you drive a blue Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door. I know you call your mother every Sunday at 3 o'clock. His smile widened as Sarah's face drained of color. "I know you've been having those dreams again." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The dreams he referenced were her most private terror, recurring nightmares about losing patients, about making fatal mistakes. She had never told anyone about them, not even her therapist. "Who are you?" she whispered, backing toward the door. "I'm exactly who I said I am," Marcus replied, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "But the real question, dear Sarah, is who are you? Because the woman I've been watching for the past 6 months is capable of so much more than she realizes. The heart monitor began beeping rapidly, not from Marcus's vitals, but from Sarah's own racing pulse as the terrible truth began to dawn on her. This wasn't a random patient brought in by chance. This was planned, orchestrated, and she was the target. As she reached for the call button, Marcus spoke again, his words stopping her cold. Before you call for help, you should know, I'm not the only one. There are others here tonight, Sarah. Others who've been waiting just as long as I have. Sarah's finger hovered over the call button as Marcus's words echoed in her mind. The fluorescent lights above flickered ominously, casting dancing shadows across his face that made his smile appear even more sinister. She tried to process what he had said about others being here, about watching her for 6 months, but her rational mind rejected the impossibility of it all. "You're hallucinating from the medication," she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. Post-surgical delirium is common. But even as she spoke, she noticed details that didn't fit. The surgical site showed no signs of fresh stitches, though she had assisted in closing those wounds herself just hours ago. His skin had a healthy pallor that contradicted the massive blood loss he had suffered. Marcus shifted in his bed, moving with fluid grace that defied his supposed injuries. "Sarah, look at me. Really look." Against her better judgment, she met his gaze and felt something cold settle in her chest. His pupils dilated and contracted rhythmically, almost hypnotically. "I need you to understand that everything you think you know about tonight is wrong. The man you've been treating isn't Marcus Webb, and those weren't random injuries." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she remembered the electronic device Dr. Richards had found. "What was that thing in your chest?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Insurance," Marcus replied cryptically, "to make sure I could find you when the time came." He gestured toward the window, where the first rays of sunlight were beginning to paint the sky pink. "Your shift ends in 2 hours, Sarah. After that, you'll go home to your little apartment, make your coffee, and try to forget about the strange patient from last night. But you won't be able to forget, because deep down, you know something fundamental has changed." Sarah forced herself to think logically. This man was clearly experiencing some form of psychotic break, possibly from head trauma they hadn't detected. She needed to alert Dr. Richards immediately. But as she turned toward the door, Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying a tone of genuine sadness. "Room 237 has been empty for 3 weeks, hasn't it, Sarah?" Her blood froze. Room 237 was directly across from Marcus's room, and it had indeed been vacant since Mrs. Chun had passed away from complications after routine surgery. It wasn't information that would be available to a random patient. The night Mrs. Chun died, you stayed with her for 4 hours past your shift. You held her hand and sang to her because she reminded you of your grandmother. Tears stung Sarah's eyes. She had never told anyone about that night, about how she had broken protocol to comfort a dying woman who had no family. How could you possibly know that? "Because I was there," Marcus said simply. In the shadows, in the corners of rooms where nurses like you show their true hearts. I've been documenting acts of genuine compassion, Sarah. You're special. The door to the room suddenly opened, making Sarah jump. Dr. Richards entered, but something was wrong with his appearance. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there after surgery. "Sarah, I need to speak with you about our patient," he said, but his voice sounded strained, forced. "Doctor, are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked, noting how he avoided looking directly at Marcus. Dr. Richards finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her stomach lurch. Fear, pure, undiluted terror. "Sarah, this man's blood work came back with anomalies I've never seen. His DNA shows markers that don't exist in any medical database. And the device we removed." He paused, glancing nervously at Marcus, who was watching the exchange with obvious amusement. "It's still transmitting." "Transmitting what?" Sarah demanded. "Everything," Marcus answered before Dr. Richards could respond. "Every conversation, every heartbeat, every secret whispered in these halls. The network has been gathering data for months, Sarah. Medical records, personal information, behavioral patterns. Your hospital isn't just treating patients, it's harvesting them." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. "That's impossible. This is a legitimate medical facility." Dr. Richards removed a small tablet from his coat pocket, his hand shaking as he showed her the screen. The display showed a real-time map of the hospital, with dozens of red dots pulsing throughout the building. Each dot was labeled with a room number and patient name. "These are all the devices, Sarah. Every patient admitted in the past 6 months has had one implanted during routine procedures. We thought they were experimental medical monitoring devices approved by administration." "But they're not," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Marcus sat up straighter, his facade of injury completely abandoned now. Dr. Richards has been very helpful, though he didn't know it. Every surgery, every procedure, every moment of trust between patient and caregiver has been recorded and analyzed. We've been building detailed psychological profiles of medical professionals, learning what makes you tick, what breaks you down, what makes you vulnerable. Why? Sarah's voice cracked with the weight of betrayal. Because nurses like you are the perfect subjects, Marcus explained, his tone becoming almost clinical. You're trained to care, to sacrifice, to put others before yourselves. You have access to vulnerable people, medical supplies, confidential information, and most importantly, you're trusted without question. He gestured toward Dr. Richards, who stood frozen by the door. The good doctor here has been unconsciously conditioning his staff for months, following protocols that seem to come from hospital administration, but actually originated from us. Sarah looked at Dr. Richards with growing horror. You knew? I swear I didn't, he said desperately. The directives seemed legitimate. Extra monitoring for patient safety, new intake procedures, additional data collection for quality improvement. I thought we were participating in a cutting-edge medical study. His voice broke as the implications hit him. God help me, I've been experimenting on my own staff. Marcus clapped slowly, mockingly. Brilliant, isn't it? Turn the healers into unknowing accomplices. But you, Sarah, you were always the primary target. Your psychological profile indicated the perfect combination of empathy, intelligence, and moral flexibility we needed for the final phase. Final phase of what? Sarah demanded, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Marcus's smile returned, colder than before. Your real test begins now, Sarah, because in exactly 90 minutes, every device in this hospital is going to activate simultaneously. Every patient, every staff member who's been exposed will receive a signal that will fundamentally alter their brain chemistry. And you're going to have to choose who lives and who becomes something else entirely. The weight of Marcus's words crashed over Sarah like a tsunami, but her nursing instincts kicked in before panic could paralyze her. She grabbed Dr. Richards by the arm, pulling him toward the door. We need to evacuate the hospital immediately, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. But Marcus's laughter stopped them both cold. Oh, Sarah, you still don't understand the scope of this. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing with impossible ease for someone who had been carved open hours earlier. The devices aren't just in the patients here tonight. They're in everyone who's been treated at Mercy General over the past 6 months. Your colleagues, their families, the mayor, the police chief, half the fire department. The signal will reach them wherever they are. Dr. Richards's tablet began buzzing with incoming messages. His face went ashen as he read. Sarah, I'm getting reports from other hospitals across the state. Similar patients, similar devices. This isn't isolated to us. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. It's coordinated. They've infiltrated the entire medical network. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Marcus was telling the truth, thousands of people were about to be affected by whatever signal these devices would transmit. What does the signal do? She demanded, though part of her feared the answer. Marcus moved to the window, gazing out at the city beginning to wake up. It activates dormant neural pathways, rewrites fundamental behavioral programming. Think of it as a switch that turns off empathy, moral reasoning, self-preservation instincts. The subjects become highly suggestible, capable of actions they would never normally consider. He turned back to them, his expression eerily serene. We've essentially created an army of people who will follow orders without question, guilt, or hesitation. That's impossible, Dr. Richards stammered. Brain chemistry doesn't work that way. Traditional brain chemistry doesn't, Marcus corrected. But 6 months of microdosing through 4 medications, combined with specific neural conditioning during procedures, has prepared their minds for this moment. The device merely provides the final trigger. Sarah felt sick as she realized the scope of the manipulation. Every patient she had cared for, every gentle touch, every reassuring word had been part of conditioning them for this moment. You used our compassion against us, she whispered. Compassion is a weakness that can be exploited, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. Medical professionals are particularly susceptible because you're trained to ignore your own instincts in favor of helping others. It makes you perfect targets for psychological manipulation. Suddenly, the hospital's PA system crackled to life. A voice that sounded like hospital administrator Mrs. Patterson spoke clearly. "Attention all staff. Please report to your assigned stations immediately. Code Silver is now in effect." But Sarah had worked at Mercy General for years, and there was no such thing as Code Silver. Dr. Richards tried his keycard on the door, but the light flashed red. They were locked in. "The security system has been compromised," he said, panic creeping into his voice. Marcus sat back down on his bed, completely relaxed. "The transformation begins in 73 minutes. But here's where it gets interesting, Sarah. The signal affects people differently based on their psychological profiles. Most will become completely compliant, but a small percentage, those with very specific neural patterns, will experience something different." "Different how?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "They'll retain their consciousness but gain enhanced abilities. Increased strength, heightened senses, resistance to pain, and most importantly, the ability to influence others through what you might call psychic suggestion." Marcus's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "We've identified you as one of the potential candidates for this enhanced state." Sarah's knees went weak. "You want to turn me into one of you. I want to give you power, Sarah, real power to change the world." Marcus stood again, moving closer despite her instinctive step backward. "Imagine being able to end suffering with a thought, to heal not just bodies but minds. You could eliminate pain, fear, doubt from human existence." "By controlling people against their will," Sarah shot back. "By freeing them from the chaos of unguided choice," Marcus countered. "Humans are naturally destructive, Sarah. They hurt each other. They pollute their environment. They choose selfishness over community. We're offering order, purpose, unity." Dr. Richards was frantically trying his phone, but no calls would connect. "The cell towers must be jammed," he muttered. Marcus nodded approvingly. "No outside interference tonight. This is just between us and the subjects we've prepared." He looked directly at Sarah. "You have a choice to make. In 68 minutes, this signal activates. You can fight it and likely die as your brain rejects the neural restructuring, or you can embrace it and become something greater than human." Sarah's training kicked in as she assessed their situation. They were trapped in a room with someone who claimed to be part of a massive conspiracy, in a hospital that was apparently compromised, with no way to contact the outside world. But her years of emergency medicine had taught her that panic was the enemy of survival. If what you're saying is true, why tell us? Why not just let the signal activate and force our compliance? Marcus's expression grew almost tender. "Because you're special, Sarah. Your psychological profile shows remarkable resistance to coercion, combined with deep empathy and strong moral convictions. Those traits are rare and valuable. We want you to choose this transformation willingly, because willing subjects retain more of their original personality while gaining enhanced abilities." "And if I refuse?" Then you'll watch everyone you care about transform into something they never chose to become, while you remain helplessly human, Marcus replied. Your mother, your sister Elena, your nephew David, they've all been patients here recently. Small procedures, minor treatments, but enough to implant the devices. Sarah's world collapsed. Elena had brought David in for his tonsillectomy just last month. Her mother had been treated for pneumonia 6 weeks ago. If Marcus was telling the truth, her entire family was about to be transformed into something unrecognizable, and she would be powerless to stop it. Unless she became one of them first. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed the impossible choice before her. Through the window, she could see the city waking up, unaware that in less than an hour, everything would change forever. Dr. Richards had slumped into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they faced, but Sarah's nursing instincts refused to let her surrender. "Show me proof," she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "If you've really implanted devices in thousands of people, show me evidence." Marcus moved to the room's computer terminal, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The screen displayed a complex network map showing pulsing dots across the entire metropolitan area. Each dot represented a person with an implanted device, complete with real-time biometric data. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized names and addresses of people she knew. Your colleague, Janet Morrison, room 314 right now. Recovering from gallbladder surgery, Marcus pointed to a red dot on the hospital map. Your friend, Lisa Chun, at home with her newborn post-cesarean section from 3 weeks ago. Your neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, who had his knee replacement here 2 months ago. Each name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Dr. Richards looked up from his hands, his face haggard. "The Hippocratic Oath," he whispered. "First, do no harm." How did I not see what was happening? Because you saw what we wanted you to see, Marcus explained with clinical detachment. The orders came through proper channels, signed by people you trusted. The devices were presented as innovative patient monitoring technology. Even the medications were delivered through established pharmaceutical companies we've infiltrated. He turned back to Sarah. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. We didn't need to convert you to our cause. We just needed you to do your jobs. Sarah studied the network display, her analytical mind working despite her fear. The timing of the signal. Why now? Why all at once? Because gradual transformation would be noticed, investigated, stopped, Marcus replied. But a simultaneous activation across multiple cities creates chaos that prevents organized resistance. Emergency services, government officials, military personnel, they'll all be affected simultaneously. Multiple cities. Dr. Richards's voice cracked. Marcus gestured to another screen that showed similar network maps for dozens of major metropolitan areas. Phase 1 covers 37 cities across the country. Phase 2 expands internationally within 72 hours. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity. Sarah noticed something in the data that sparked hope. The devices require proximity to a transmission source, she observed, studying the signal patterns. That's why you're here tonight. You're not just a patient, you're a transmitter. Marcus's smile faltered slightly, very perceptive. Yes, I am the primary node for this facility. But destroying me won't stop the signal. It will only delay it by a few hours while the network reroutes through secondary nodes. Secondary nodes? Sarah pressed. 3 other individuals currently in this hospital, posing as patients or staff members, Marcus admitted. Even if you somehow manage to identify and eliminate all of us, the devices would eventually activate through satellite transmission. It would simply take longer and be less precise. Sarah's mind was working furiously now, her years of crisis management training taking over. Dr. Richards, do you still have access to the PA system? The doctor checked his credentials on the computer. Yes, my administrative codes still work. If we could warn people, tell them to get away from medical facilities, ... Sarah began. It wouldn't matter, Marcus interrupted. The devices have a range of 50 miles once activated. Geographic distance won't save them. Only neural shielding can block the signal, and the materials required aren't readily available. What materials? Sarah demanded. Marcus hesitated for the first time since their conversation began. Specific metallic compounds that interfere with electromagnetic frequencies. But even if you knew what to look for, you couldn't acquire enough to protect more than a few people. Dr. Richard suddenly sat up straighter. The MRI machines, he said excitedly. They use powerful magnetic fields. Could those disrupt the signal? Temporarily, perhaps, Marcus conceded, looking annoyed that they were finding potential solutions. But MRI chambers can only hold one person at a time, and the protection would only last as long as they remained inside the magnetic field. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, somehow getting through despite the supposed jamming. The message was from her sister Elena. David's feeling strange after his surgery last month. Acting different, asking weird questions about you. Should I be worried? Marcus watched Sarah, read the message, his expression sympathetic but unmoved. It's beginning already. The preliminary conditioning is wearing off, and their minds are becoming more susceptible to direct influence. In approximately 45 minutes, David will no longer be your nephew. He'll be a tool for monitoring and controlling you. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, hot and purifying. You're talking about children. Age is irrelevant to neuroplasticity, Marcus replied coldly. In fact, younger subjects often adapt more successfully to the transformation. Dr. Richards stood up abruptly, his medical ethics finally overriding his fear. I won't let you hurt kids. Whatever this signal is, there has to be a way to stop it. Marcus's demeanor shifted, becoming more predatory. Dr. Richards, you're becoming emotional. That's counterproductive. As he spoke, the air in the room seemed to thicken, and both Sarah and Dr. Richards felt a strange pressure in their heads. Perhaps you need to calm down. Sarah watched in horror as Dr. Richards' expression became blank, his posture relaxing unnaturally. I feel better now, he said in a monotone voice. We should listen to Marcus. He's trying to help us. That's a demonstration of what you could become, Sarah, Marcus explained. Enhanced subjects can influence others through targeted electromagnetic manipulation of neural pathways. Dr. Richards is experiencing a mild version of what the devices will do on a massive scale. Sarah realized she was completely alone now. Dr. Richards was compromised. The hospital was under some form of control, and in less than an hour, everyone she loved would be transformed into something inhuman. But as she looked at Marcus's confident expression, a new determination filled her heart. She was a trauma nurse. She had saved lives in impossible situations, stayed calm during medical emergencies that would break most people, and fought death itself in these very halls. If Marcus thought her compassion made her weak, he was about to learn how wrong he was. "I need time to think," she said, moving toward the door. "Of course," Marcus replied graciously. "But remember, Sarah, 42 minutes until activation. Choose wisely." Sarah stepped into the hallway, her mind racing with desperate calculations. Dr. Richards followed her with that blank, controlled expression that made her stomach turn. She had 41 minutes to save thousands of lives, armed with nothing but her medical knowledge and a growing fury that burned away her fear. The hospital corridors felt different now, charged with malevolent energy. Every patient room she passed might contain another transmitter like Marcus. Every colleague she encountered might already be compromised. But Sarah Martinez hadn't spent 12 years saving lives in emergency medicine to surrender now. She made her way to the supply closet, grabbing items that could serve as weapons if necessary. A scalpel, syringes, emergency medications. If these devices were electromagnetic, perhaps she could disrupt them chemically. "Dr. Richards," she said carefully, testing his level of control, "what medications would interfere with electronic devices in the human body?" His response came in that same flat tone: strong magnetic fields, electrical disruption, or specific chemical compounds that affect neural conductivity. Sarah's heart raced. Even under Marcus's influence, Dr. Richards retained his medical knowledge. She could work with that. What chemical compounds? High doses of certain psychoactive medications, particularly those affecting dopamine and serotonin reuptake. He recited mechanically, but such doses would be lethal to normal humans. An idea began forming in Sarah's mind, desperate but possible. She gathered specific medications from the pharmacy lockbox, using her credentials to access controlled substances. If she couldn't save everyone, maybe she could save some. Maybe she could create enough chaos to disrupt their plan. 28 minutes until activation. Sarah made her way to the hospital's central air handling system. If she could aerosolize the right combination of medications, she might be able to affect everyone in the building simultaneously. The doses would be subtherapeutic for normal people, but potentially disruptive to the device's electromagnetic functions. As she worked, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Elena. David collapsed, taking him to emergency. "Something's wrong with his eyes. They keep changing color." Sarah's hands shook as she prepared the aerosol mixture. Her nephew was already transforming, which meant the devices could activate individually before the main signal. Marcus had lied about the timing, or the network was more complex than he had revealed. Footsteps echoed in the mechanical room behind her. Sarah spun around to find three people she recognized: Janet Morrison from pediatrics, Dr. Ahmed from radiology, and surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson, the hospital administrator. All three had the same blank expression as Dr. Richards. "Sarah, you need to stop," Janet said in an unnaturally calm voice. "You're interfering with an important medical procedure." Sarah realized that Marcus's demonstration of control hadn't been limited to Dr. Richards. These people had been under influence for much longer, possibly weeks or months. "How many of you are there?" she asked, backing toward the air vent controls. "Enough," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Sarah, you're fighting something beautiful. The transformation eliminates suffering, conflict, confusion. People become their best selves, freed from destructive emotions and selfish impulses." "They become slaves," Sarah countered, her hand finding the vent activation switch. Dr. Ahmed stepped forward, his movement too fluid, too coordinated with the others. "Slavery implies unwillingness. The subjects will be grateful for their liberation from the chaos of human emotion." Sarah triggered the aerosol release and dove toward the emergency fire alarm. If she could create enough confusion, maybe some people could escape before the main signal activated. The alarm's piercing wail filled the hospital as emergency lights began flashing. 15 minutes until activation. As she ran through the corridors, Sarah saw the true scope of the infiltration. Staff members moved with that same controlled precision, herding confused patients toward specific locations. The transformation had been happening gradually, and tonight was simply the culmination. Sarah's hands shook as she prepared the aerosol mixture. Her nephew was already transforming, which meant the devices could activate individually before the main signal. Marcus had lied about the timing, or the network was more complex than he had revealed. Footsteps echoed in the mechanical room behind her. Sarah spun around to find three people she recognized: Janet Morrison from pediatrics, Dr. Ahmed from radiology, and surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson, the hospital administrator. All three had the same blank expression as Dr. Richards. "Sarah, you need to stop," Janet said in an unnaturally calm voice. "You're interfering with an important medical procedure." Sarah realized that Marcus's demonstration of control hadn't been limited to Dr. Richards. These people had been under influence for much longer, possibly weeks or months. "How many of you are there?" she asked, backing toward the air vent controls. "Enough," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Sarah, you're fighting something beautiful. The transformation eliminates suffering, conflict, confusion. People become their best selves, freed from destructive emotions and selfish impulses." "They become slaves," Sarah countered, her hand finding the vent activation switch. Dr. Ahmed stepped forward, his movement too fluid, too coordinated with the others. "Slavery implies unwillingness. The subjects will be grateful for their liberation from the chaos of human emotion." Sarah triggered the aerosol release and dove toward the emergency fire alarm. If she could create enough confusion, maybe some people could escape before the main signal activated. The alarm's piercing wail filled the hospital as emergency lights began flashing. 15 minutes until activation. As she ran through the corridors, Sarah saw the true scope of the infiltration. Staff members moved with that same controlled precision, herding confused patients toward specific locations. The transformation had been happening gradually, and tonight was simply the culmination. Don't let Sarah's courage go unnoticed. Share this story with others who need to hear about real heroes. Subscribe for more untold stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered most. Comment below about heroes in your own life, and remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness is simply refusing to give up. Hit that notification bell because truth has a way of inspiring more truth, and these stories need to be told.